Good morning and good evening. Welcome to WorldDenver's virtual speaker program. My name is Lauren Ozga. I'm the Director of Development and Communications here at WorldDenver, and we're an organization that facilitates international exchange and global engagement. And we've been really pleased to continue providing these opportunities for our community, even in the virtual space. We're thrilled today to welcome Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger to speak about his new book, and to welcome back Ambassador Christopher Hill, a longtime WorldDenver friend and a board member. We're also very fortunate to have several partners for this event, including the German-American Chamber of Commerce here in Colorado and the American Council on Germany. This program is also presented by Wunderbar Together and the World Affairs Councils of America as part of their Engage America series. A huge thank you to them and to all of our partners for your support and participation. I'd now like to hand it over to our Honorary Consul of Germany here in Colorado, Paul Merkel.
Hello, everyone. It is my great honor to introduce you to Ambassador Christopher Hill. Over his long career, Ambassador Hill was at the forefront of U.S. foreign policy in multiple regions, including serving as ambassador to Iraq, the Republic of Korea, Poland, and Macedonia. After a distinguished career in the Foreign Service, he led and taught at the University of Denver's Korbel School of International Affairs. Ambassador Hill serves on the WorldDenver board and most recently has joined Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs as the George W. Ball Adjunct Professor for the spring of 2021. So with that, welcome Ambassador Hill.
Thank you very much. Let me quickly transit to the main event, which is certainly not me, but is rather Wolfgang, who is truly one of the, I would say, not only national assets of the Federal Republic of Germany, but of Europe and of international statescraft. Dr. Professor Ambassador Ischinger, Wolfgang, you'll have to tell us which one you prefer, is truly someone who has seen it all. He is a career foreign ministry figure, starting his career back in 1973. But I think what is most remarkable is that he has been at the forefront, indeed at the center of the European Union project, the project of unification of Europe. He has been a key person, of course, in dealing with bringing the Euro-Atlantic region together. I first got to meet him some 25 years ago, almost exactly, in the Dayton Peace Accords, which was, of course, about a small country far away from here, that is Bosnia, but really in a deeper sense meant it was a country, it was an issue, it was a crisis really that served to bring the U.S. and its European allies together. And so our capacity to work on those issues following the Cold War was absolutely critical. And Wolfgang Ischinger was absolutely in the center of it. So much so that later in his career, he not only was the ambassador of Germany to the United Kingdom, but later on, on a rather fateful date, he began at a time his service as the German ambassador to the United States on September 11th, 2001. I think it's fair to say that Ambassador Ischinger has seen just about everything there is to be seen in the Euro-Atlantic relationship, and I think he continues to dedicate himself to the process of bringing us all closer together. For now over 10 years, he has been in charge of the Munich Security Conference. It's a conference that over the years has attracted very important Americans to come to meet with equally important Europeans and discuss issues. In recent years, it's been said that there are fewer Americans going to this, and I think that might be something we could talk to him about, whether there are fewer Americans or whether Americans are simply making less of an impact at this world famous conference that takes place every year in the February time zone. Ambassador Ischinger has most recently, and I think very importantly, written a book whose title is World in Danger. So perhaps I can dispense with the first question as to why he wrote this book, because I think it's pretty obvious. There's a lot of issues out there. We see a Euro-Atlantic structure that is not what it used to be. And we see part of the United States, as he analyzes very carefully, kind of pulling away from Europe and from our international responsibilities. So I think we're in for a really interesting discussion. I think Ambassador Ischinger can talk about his motivation for the book, what he feels Europe needs to do, what he feels perhaps he can give us some advice on what the United States needs to do, although there's a wonderful section in the book about diplomacy and sort of do's and don'ts, and be a little careful about telling other countries what they should be doing. Maybe he can pass that anecdote about his interaction with the latest U.S. ambassador to Germany. So I'm now going to turn over the floor to Ambassador Ischinger, and with the expectations that we are absolutely in for a treat. And I want to thank you so much for virtually visiting Denver. It's a fabulous place. You've got to see more of it than just through a computer. And I know you've been there before, and I'm sure you will come again. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for making yourself available for this presentation, for this discussion. As you said, we first ran into each other as career diplomats 25 years ago or so, as we were on the final stretch of the solution of the Bosnian War, the Dayton conference, and its successful conclusion. And I know what debt of gratitude we all owe to you and your professionalism. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. But let me start by saying that, you know, not only did we meet 25 years ago, but we're in the month of October 2020, and exactly 30 years ago, on the 3rd of October, so a little over 30 years ago, Germany celebrated its reunification, a historic event, an almost unexpected gift to the German nation, to the German people. And I want to remind the audience, ourselves, that without the kind of trust that had developed between then Chancellor Kohl and the German Foreign Minister Untitled on the German side, and President Bush 41 and his Secretary of State Jim Baker, and the numerous senior advisors surrounding Jim Baker and those in the White House, we would not have been offered reunification. It would just not have happened without determined American support. So I just want to, at the outset, I want to say thank you, America. Thank you, Americans. Thank you for doing for your partner, your post-war partner, Germany, something that we will be eternally grateful for. So that is really point one, and it comes from my heart. Point two is I'm really delighted that I finally managed to get an English language edition of this book out, the German version of which appeared already 2 years ago. And the German version has the same title, Welt in Gefahr, World in Danger. If I had to start writing the book this year, I would have probably made it sound a little even more dramatic. Maybe I would have said World in Great Danger or something, because I think between the time I started thinking about this book and the present day, a week before the elections in the United States, this year of 2020, with the pandemic and with unresolved global issues like climate change and terrorism and migration pressures in Europe, etc., and unresolved arms control issues and nuclear threats and etc. And the list is so long. We are experiencing we are experiencing major disruptive, dramatic changes in our global security environment. That is probably also true when you look at the world from the United States point of view. But you are, of course, a continent in yourself. We are a bunch of small countries in Europe, and we are therefore probably much more dependent on what goes on in other parts of the world. Germany is an extremely export-dependent country. So what's going on in the South China Seas, what's going on in the Middle East, etc., affects us, our economic prosperity, etc., probably even more than would be the case in the United States. So a few years ago, I was approached by a German book publisher who said, Ischinger, now you've spent 40 years with diplomacy, and the German population doesn't really understand that diplomacy is actually a nasty profession, because it is not, as many people believe, a daily decision between good and bad, between bright and dark. So I said, I understand what you're saying. You want me to explain that diplomatic decisions, international decisions that our leaders need to take are very often decisions between shades of gray, where you are really worrying about which one of your options is the least damaging one, the least terrible one. And there is not a single really bright and good one inside. And I think that was sort of one of the motivational ideas that led me to finally to agree to try to write this book, and to talk a little bit about what kind of a challenging job diplomacy can be, especially if it's about war and peace, about life and death, about conflict resolution or conflict prevention, things that both of us have lived through. Finally, let me say that my book is essentially a message about the future of Europe, because as a German, I believe that small nations like all the member states of the European Union, and actually also the one member state of the European Union which is currently about to leave the European Union, our friends in the United Kingdom, we're all small nations, and we will not be able to defend our interests, whether they are societal interests or climate interests or economic interests or security interests, if we try to do that on our own. We need to integrate into a larger group, and that's what we've been trying to do in the European Union, of course, for the last 50 or 60 or even more years. But we are not even halfway where we should be. We are still dependent on the United States. And I want, one of the messages in my book is, even if many Europeans, even if many Germans have expressed a sense of frustration or anger or dissatisfaction with the current administration in Washington, it remains true that the transatlantic link is a life preserver for us in Europe. We cannot, even if we wanted to, we cannot do without close transatlantic cooperation. That's true for, of course, such arcane issues as nuclear deterrence, the keeping NATO alive, but it's actually also true when you think of high tech, the digital revolution, and how we as Western societies try to find the right compromise between, selling data to everyone and preserving privacy for the individual. And because we are a society, we are societies on both sides of the Atlantic that honor and want to preserve the rights of the individual, etc. So I think we're bound. We continue to be bound together, joined at the hip, as they say, across the Atlantic. And I think that's in the current environment where there have been so many frustrations on both sides of the Atlantic, that is important to remember as we look to hopefully more fruitful, more harmonious 4 years to come, depending on what the outcome of your elections in the United States will be, not only at the level of the president, but also when I look at the choices that are going to be made regarding, Senate seats, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, maybe one last point, which as someone who has actually spent many years of his life in the United States, I was first there as a high school student, learned how to play football and so on. I studied law at Harvard Law School for a bit, and later worked in the United States several times as a diplomat. I find it almost funny to what extent my fellow Germans, when they look at at things going on in the United States, they are sometimes really unhappy with the fact that they are not allowed to vote in US elections, because they think that actually what the decisions made in Washington, D.C. affect our lives in Europe, and particularly in Germany, so much that it's actually not fair for us not to have a vote in the United States. So don't be surprised if next, on November the 3rd, or at the night following November the 3rd, dozens of millions of Germans will stay awake through the night to watch what's going on in your polling booths, and what the first results will bring. The interest is enormous, and I think that is actually a very good sign. I'll stop here for the moment. I mean, my heart is full, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to share with you my joy that the book is now out in the bookstores in coming days, and I hope it will attract some interest by those in the United States who share my interest, or our interest, in a vibrant and mutually useful transatlantic relationship.
Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, the book is out, and it's published by Brookings Institute. So when you see Brookings Institute, you might think you're reading a very sort of academic book about diplomacy. Actually, I think it's fair to say that, oh, there it is. There it is. A very nice picture, by the way. Good necktie.
Yes.
What I really liked about the book is it's kind of written in a way that you talk. It's very clear, no jargon, no diplomatese. People often talk about that somehow being diplomatic is to not at all be clear what you're talking about. In fact, it should be quite the opposite. It should be very, very clear. And that book is very well written, and even for people who are not steeped in Euro-Atlantic structures, it's something that I think one could understand. It's readily accessible there. So my first question is, let's assume, which is usually something an economist says, but let's assume, diplomats can say that too, that we have a possibility of an era of harmonious relations, I think was your euphemism for the result of the US election. So I think there are two ways to go about it. One is the US and Germany sit down together in a sort of therapy session and try to work out the differences between us. And often those are fraught and difficult. But I think another way to do it is, can we sit down and maybe agree that we can work on some third situations, that is situations not necessarily between the two of us, but rather some third country that the two of us have similar views on, and that maybe we can make progress in dealing with that third country. And in that progress, we can build momentum. And before you know it, we're back to a better situation. So one of the big issues in Europe and in the United States, and I think you alluded to the fact that it's also in Europe, is what are we going to do, or how are we going to manage the relationship with 1/6 of the world's population, that is a country called China. And it seems that we have a lot of similarities. And is there something we can do together that will make clear to the Chinese that we wish them success, but it's going to have to be in a rules-based system? Over to you, Wolfgang.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for directing our discussion to China, because I certainly agree that if there is one long-term challenge to all of us in the West, to you in the United States and to us in Europe, it is how best to deal with this rising global superpower, China. Now, I think it's not difficult to understand, even if one is not a foreign policy expert, that if the United States and the European Union could agree on some joint approach to China, that would automatically make us stronger. There are a couple of problems, though. I agree with you that there are, between the US approach to China and the European approach to China, there are a number of areas of overlap where our interests are not so difficult to reconcile, where we could probably quite easily develop a common approach. I think of such issues as how to deal with human rights. What about our reaction to what has been happening in Hong Kong, for example, etc. But at the more strategic level, I think there remain also serious and important differences. My own impression, and I may be wrong here, I mean, I'm looking at this from Europe, and I may be wrong, but my impression has been that the American discussion on China is, of course, a discussion led by a superpower, the United States, about a country that is about also to become a very, very important rival. In other words, the essence of your discussion of the American concern about China is quite a confrontational discussion. It seems to me sometimes it's the question asked by Americans is, so who's going to win this? Are we winning or are they winning? We in Europe don't even have a chance to ask this kind of question, because we are not in we're not at eye level with China. We're a bunch of 27 small countries. So we look at China more from the point of view, is it possible for us to create a level playing field where our opportunities to invest in China for our companies would be the same as the kinds of opportunities that we offer in Europe to Chinese state-owned, state-run companies. to what extent can we protect intellectual property? What about Huawei, the 5G networks, etc.? So I think that we need to figure out a way to align our strategic approaches to China. That is not going to be very easy. In other words, we need some degree of strategic patience. We need interesting high-level communication channels across the Atlantic. But most importantly, and that's my central point, we on the European side, we need to do our homework. We need to develop something which you on the American side would be willing to accept as a European initial position on China, which so far we don't have. We have some beginning discussion about an EU-China strategy. But what we actually have, I'll be very frank with you, there is a German-China policy, there is a French-China policy, there is an Italian-China policy, and until very recently, the German-China policy, for example, was a policy that had exactly one major objective, namely, can we sell the maximum number of automobiles in China? Full stop. Recently, over the last couple of years, our discussion of China has become a little more sophisticated, including human rights issues, including geostrategic issues, including a number of high-tech issues and others. But in other words, I think I would totally agree with you. China is, for us in the transatlantic framework, a huge opportunity, but also a necessity to try to coordinate as best we can, because if we are, and I repeat what I said in the beginning, if we can coordinate or cooperate on how best to on how to deal with China, we will be so much more effective. So I hope that there will be a China approach shared by the US and the European Union. In fact, I worked with a group of people from both sides of the Atlantic under the auspices of the German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. And we came up with the idea that what would be desirable would be a kind of a vice presidential level working group or commission led on the American side by somebody at the level of the vice president, in other words, comprising all the relevant government departments and maybe the president of the EU Commission and various foreign ministers or other senior officials from the key European member state. I think something like that is actually necessary, and it's going to be necessary not just for a couple of weeks or months, it's going to be necessary for the long haul.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is there's a desire to see if we can reduce our differences and then work together more effectively with China. Let me mention another really hot button issue. I mean, there's so many of them right now, but I mean, one of the issues that really worries me is the question of the Iran, what we know as the Iran deal, the JCPOA. One of the reasons that it's so critical and so corrosive in the alliance is that when the U.S. tries to talk about reimposing sanctions, there's this old issue and difficult issue of so-called extraterritoriality, where the U.S. is saying anybody essentially who deals with dollar-denominated trade has to, join in a renewal of sanctions. So it strikes me as something that it's not that it just stays the same, the Iran issue, that it actually gets worse every time the U.S. tries to push additional sanctions and expand the scope. So let's say we have a U.S. that's willing to get back into the game, whether it's by maybe getting some JCPOA plus, that is getting the Iranians to take the limitation, the year's limitation. The University of Denver graduate Javed Zarif, I thought I'd get a plug in for Denver. Zarif said that they would be willing to take the fatwa of the Ayatollah and put it through their legislative process to the effect that they are not interested in nuclear weapons, and really put that into national legislation. So how do you see us kind of getting back together on Iran if this era of harmonious relations returns? Again, I'm being very careful not to suggest who I think would be a better presidential candidate to lead us in the future.
Well, Chris, first of all, on the fundamentals, let us be realistic. I think that regardless of what the outcome of your presidential election is going to be, there are a number of issues between us, transatlantic conflict issues, that will not automatically tend to go away. For example, just as an example, before I come back to Iran, the issue of transatlantic defense burden sharing, of course, was a burden on our relationship long before Donald Trump was elected president. I remember what they called at the time the valedictorian speech by Bob Gates, your former Secretary of Defense, who told us on the European side, if you guys don't get your act together and do more about it, you cannot expect the taxpayer in the United States to carry you through the next kinds of crises. He was, of course, right. The problem was we didn't take it seriously enough at the time. So, and this is not the only issue where, regardless of Trump or Biden or whoever, we will need to work, and we will need to do our homework on the European side, quite frankly. So there is not going to be a kind of transatlantic paradise that we can expect to return to, because there was never really paradise. We've always had issues, which is normal in this kind of relationship. Now, with respect to Iran, remember, you have to go back to the year 2003, 17 years ago. The three European partners, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, got together and decided we were torn apart over this Iraq issue, and that was certainly not good for anyone, certainly not for European unity. So let's learn from that, and let's get our act together and try to develop a policy approach on Iran, because obviously there is a nuclear problem there, and let's approach it. So this has been a long effort, and I think the effort finally led to an agreement, which our experts call the JCPOA, which we were able to get through with the Iranians because the United States took a strong leadership role. I think at the time, Secretary Kerry and Secretary Moniz from the Energy Department were really leading the effort to get this agreement done, and I can only applaud that. That was a joint American-European effort. The recent American decisions to abandon this agreement and pursue a policy, I think, as it has been called, of maximum pressure against Iran, I'm afraid I don't see so far the desired effects on the Iranian side. I'm not sure that we can actually say that because of the American maximum pressure policy, Iran is now further away from developing a nuclear capability than was the case right after the signing of the JCPOA in 2015 or 16, whenever it was. So my hope would be that we would be able to reconnect on this issue, and actually to start again where we left off, because we had, on both sides of the Atlantic, we had determined that, of course, the JCPOA was a necessary first step. It was only on the nuclear capacity of Iran, but there were other issues out there that had not been dealt with by that agreement, such as, Hezbollah, such as regional crises in which Iran and other regional actors were involved, such as ballistic missile development, which is also not covered by the JCPOA. So I think our experts at the time in 2016 had started to work, as you called it, a JCPOA plus approach, trying to figure out a way to convince the Iranians to take this agreement to the next level and include some additional issues into it. I think it's worth exploring again in a joint American-European manner whether the Iranians would be willing to talk to us about this, and if what Foreign Minister Zarif has alluded to, if we can take that seriously, well, fine. Let's see how far we can get with the Iranian leadership. I really hope that we can recreate something which deserves to be called a joint American-European approach on Iran. Let's not be divided about that. Let's unite on this difficult but very important issue.
Do you share my concern that the American penchant for reaching for sanctions fairly quickly now, and if it doesn't happen from an administration, it happens from our Congress, is putting a further strain on the relationship with the Europeans? Is that something we need to work on? I'm talking more about mechanisms and consultation here than necessarily the final results.
Well, let me put it this way. I think we have discovered over the last 15 years or so that sanctions are not simply a very crude instrument to put pressure on a foreign government, but sanctions can be fine-tuned. You can create, as we say, targeted sanctions against a particular group of people or institutions, etc. And you, on the United States side, you have been particularly sophisticated and successful. As I recall, you have an entire department in your treasury that has very, very good experts to come up with sophisticated sanctions approaches. That is actually probably a necessary and useful instrument of foreign policy if we don't want to start shooting each time we are unhappy with something. The problem, however, is please don't apply sanctions to your friends and allies. And when some time ago, some months ago, some senators suggested that because America was unhappy with and was opposed to the so-called Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and this is a controversial issue in Germany, whether this pipeline is a good or a bad idea. I'm more on the side of those who believe it's not a particularly good idea to build a new pipeline connecting us to Russian gas if we have the kinds of huge contentious issues with Russia, which we have at the moment. But threatening a German village or a German region or the German government with American sanctions because you don't like what the German government is doing, that is, quite frankly, that tends to be poisonous for the relationship, because it is applying, the screws to somebody who is actually supposed to be your partner and ally and friend. So I would suggest that we use sanctions in a smart way against our adversaries and to obtain certain results from those who don't want to listen to us as the West. But I don't think that applying sanctions within the Western community against each other is a good idea. Look, just a few days ago, I was looking through a report prepared by a European think tank which not unexpectedly is now exploring the idea, if the US can do that to us, could we on the EU side, I mean, we are a powerful trading bloc, 450 million people, bigger than the United States. Can we maybe do that to the US also? I think that's a very bad idea.
Yeah.
We shouldn't even start talking about that.
Yeah. We'd have to stop buying BMWs from South Carolina, I guess.
Yeah.
Wolfgang, in your book, you have these kind of fun little segments. I think it's kind of early on in the book where you talk about, it's not titled this, but something along the lines of do's and don'ts for diplomats. I alluded to earlier to one of my favorites where the American ambassador to Germany, who's since left, he's no longer the ambassador there, arrives, I guess gets out of his car, gets a night's sleep, and the next day starts tweeting about what the German government's policy should be on various issues. And you made the point that if you're an ambassador, you might do well to explain what your country's policy is and why you're doing it, and let the host nation figure out what their approach should be. I mean, I've often told people that, you know, you should show a little patience, show you love being there, and eventually people will like that you're there, and then you can say things that you wouldn't otherwise say, but it's a process and it's a relationship. I wonder if you can go over some of the things you've observed. You've been in the game for a long time, and it's no accident that you've done the most important jobs in the German foreign ministry.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, you know, when I served in Washington, D.C., beginning, as you pointed out, right when 9/11 happened, for my first year or so, 2001 into 2002, we had actually a very pleasant and fruitful relationship between the White House, President Bush 43, and Chancellor Schröder on the German side, and their ministers on both sides. Then all of a sudden, you know, this Iraq bomb went off, and we were split apart. Remember, you had a number of European countries joining the United States in the US approach to the Iraq intervention, but there were some on the European side, including Germany and France, who were not convinced and who refused to go along. And my personal experience was that it was better for me as the German ambassador not to write a newspaper article in the Washington Post explaining to the United States government what they are supposed to do, because I thought that is actually not my job. I'm paid to advise my own government and not the White House. So what I did, what I tried to do repeatedly in television programs, in newspaper articles, in interviews, etc., I tried to explain to the American public why the German government and the German parliament felt that intervening militarily in Iraq was actually not a good idea. And I always said, you know, we have to respect American decisions, even if we think they may be wrong, but it's only my job to explain why we think they might be wrong and why we on the German side have a different position. So I think I was better off in communicating with the American public without, you know, this finger explaining what you should do. And that is what I said when your most recent ambassador arrived a couple of years ago, and really on the day of accreditation, when he presented his papers to the federal president of Germany, he literally within minutes, he gave a little interview and told the German companies and the German public, what you now need to do is get out of Iran right away, because that's what we want you to do. And he tweeted that on Twitter. So I tweeted back and I said, you know, quite frankly, I think the Germans are really very interested in knowing what you think America's policy is and should be and will be. But I don't think that Germans will appreciate being instructed by the American ambassador what they should do. That is just not the kind of approach you would want to adopt, because you are not just a visitor or a critic, or because you're actually accredited to this other nation, and you need to respect a certain set of rules in our diplomatic community. And quite frankly, my own experience has been, I was actually a more successful ambassador, I think, by not walking around Washington and telling everybody that you're making mistakes. I think I would have been quite unpopular in Washington. I'd never tried to do that. I said, no, all I will try to explain to you is why my government has decided to take a different position. So let me explain what our motivations are. And in my experience, that worked really quite well. I was unable to turn George W. Bush around, obviously, but I never expected that. But I think I managed to explain our position in a way that was often quite appreciated and not resented by those who listened to it.
Yeah, I think you also, I found being in these positions, if someone back home wants to make some blistering comment against the country that you're accredited to, let the person back home do that. The
Absolutely.
ambassador, you need to keep the door open, make sure you have good communications, and tweeting your views on the host country's policies may not be the best way to do that. And I think our ambassador and the FRG learned that. So.
Absolutely, yes, indeed.
Yeah. Lauren, do you want to go to questions at this point? I see you've appeared on the screen here. Lauren?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, we've got a couple questions from the audience for the last few minutes. I've combined a couple of them. People are curious, is Germany preparing for two different outcomes of the US presidential election, or are they waiting to see what happens and what the foreign policy plan will be? And if so, if it is a new Biden administration, what would they need to do to reorient the US relationship with Europe?
That's a great question. Well, obviously there is in Europe, not only in Germany, widespread dissatisfaction regarding the state of the relationship between the Trump administration and us in the EU, particularly actually in my own country, because as far as I can see, the personal relationship between President Trump and Chancellor Merkel has been less than fully harmonious. Let me put it this way. So I think there is a tremendous desire in Germany to find a way to smooth things out and to return to something which would deserve to be called a relationship of mutual trust, which actually we had through decades, even if at times we had difficult issues to resolve. So, I think there is first of all tremendous interest in the German public. You cannot imagine how many people are looking at the morning newspapers or listening to their morning radio shows to understand exactly what the latest polls in the United States are. It's again, I can only repeat, Germans behave as if it was their own country. The interest is tremendous. It's extremely strong. Germans, of course, do not know Vice President Biden very well. I happen to know him quite well because he was a senator when I served in as ambassador, and he was a wonderful speaker at the Munich Security Conference, which I've had the privilege of organizing for the last decade or so. And he came actually twice in his capacity as vice president and spoke and was got enormous applause. And he even returned in his current capacity as a candidate. He returned to the Munich Security Conference earlier this year and spoke there again. So he is known to the expert community in Germany, but the average German has not really met him, etc. But I think the average German hopes that whatever the outcome of your election is, that the relationship will again be one of trust. Because the one thing that Germans have learned in the long period of the Cold War and beyond is that we in Europe are unable, unfortunately, I'm very frank with you, we are unable to defend ourselves if ever there were a serious threat to our borders. And that is why we believe we're not going to be able to survive in a dangerous world. That's what my book is about, World in Danger. If we do not have a meaningful, trustful, and living transatlantic relationship through NATO, but also at the personal level of the leaders. And so Germans are hoping very much that there would be a return to trust and to the kinds of cooperative relationships that we had during the Reagan administration, during the Clinton administration, during the Bush administration, both Bush administrations, obviously, but also during the years of the Obama administration. Most of the post-World War II periods were actually good periods in the German-American relationship, and we want to return to that.
Lauren, if I could just ask a quick question. I know you have a list of questions, but both Wolfgang and I worked very hard on the Balkan situation, not only at Dayton or in Bosnia, but also in Kosovo, which was an especially difficult situation. After all, this was a part of Serbia, or so the Serbs strongly believed, and we created this sort of UN NATO protectorate with a very uncertain future. It eventually became independent. There's still several countries that even in Europe that don't recognize its independence. But lurking in the background was always the idea that these small states in the Balkans, former parts of the Ottoman Empire, would eventually be willingly and frankly very happy to join the European Union. And yet at a certain point there seemed to be a kind of exhaustion coming from the European Union. And I guess I'm asking, is that period of exhaustion over? Are we going to see Albania, North Macedonia, we're going to see these countries and Kosovo arrive at their final stop?
Well, I am actually quite optimistic that the worst is over. You are absolutely right, Chris. There was a period when the idea of more enlargement was beginning to be quite unpopular for a variety of reasons that we don't have the time to go into. But I think the ice has been broken recently. We are now at least in the beginning phase of talking about membership discussions, with both Albania and North Macedonia. That's an important, that is a very important step. But it's also important for Americans to understand that we in the EU, we have this difficult job of balancing our interest in bringing in interested additional candidate countries into the EU, but at the same time, through the enlargement process, not to dilute, but actually to deepen the European Union, to enhance the level of integration. That to do that is really complex. It has kept us busy for the last couple of decades. It's a very, very demanding kind of political ambition that drives us forward. So what my message simply is, you should not underestimate the complexities of these enlargement processes, because we know that the European Union will only survive in the long term if we can continue to enhance the integration process and create a more perfect union, as you would call it.
Yeah. And by the way, in addition to your great diplomatic work on that part of Europe, you've also been involved in a humanitarian level. And I think the people of Kosovo and other parts of the Balkans are very, very aware of your personal contributions to helping that part of Europe succeed. So thank you. Lauren?
Thank you. Yes, that's all the time we have for questions. So I'd like to just wrap it up by thanking you both for being part of this program, for giving us your time and expertise. And I want to take a chance to invite everyone who's watching to our next virtual speaker series on November 18th with John Alterman from the Center for Strategic International Studies. And you can check out all of our upcoming events at worlddenver.org. And also like to ask you to please remember WorldDenver on Colorado Gives Day. It's time to start scheduling your gifts as of this Sunday, November 1st. And I just want to recognize our partners again, the German-American Chamber of Commerce, the American Council on Germany, Wunderbar together, the World Affairs Councils of America, who made this program possible. And in the final couple minutes, I want to hand it over to our colleague at the German-American Chamber of Commerce, William Reed, who's going to share a bit about their Christkindl market coming up this year downtown that we're all very excited about. Hi, William.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Lauren. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And thank you, Ambassadors Ischinger and Hill. Really appreciate you sharing such a fascinating and timely discussion with all of our members today. I want to just also echo Lauren's sentiments, thanking WorldDenver for putting all of this together in conjunction with Wunderbar together, the World Affairs Councils of America, and the American Council on Germany. And of course, a thank you to Paul Miracle, Honorary Consul of Germany in the districts of Colorado and Wyoming, who introduced the session. And apologies for my technical issues at the start of today, which was why I was a little bit late and am delivering this now. So thank you. As Lauren mentioned, we are hosting our annual fundraiser at the Denver Christkindl Market. It's actually our 20th anniversary. And we are able to host it, which is incredible. We're moving it to Civic Center Park. It's a much larger space, and we're able to really incorporate a lot of social distancing and really make it an event where we can enjoy the holidays this year with you in a way that's responsible and as safe as possible for Coloradans and anyone else who happens to be in town. So thank you again, Ambassadors Ischinger and Hill, and thank you, Lauren, for putting all of this together. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chris. That was a pleasure.